Hi everyone. So I recorded a video recently about my special top three abilities, and something that most people assume, and they assume quite incorrectly, is that they came fully formed, and I didn't need to do anything to develop them. And that's not true. So I thought it would be interesting to share sort of how they unfolded, just to give an idea of sort of um, what's involved in sometimes in unfolding and developing some of these special skills. So, um, really, my journey with my abilities really began when I was ill. So, 2007 through to 2000 and probably 2011, 2012. Um, I had ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, and I started to get deeper in, develop a deeper interest in spirituality, non-religious spirituality, and tools and techniques and healing as a obviously to look for healing for myself for the physical. So I got quite interested in it. I had never given any space or time in my life for it. But as I was very ill and I often couldn't move, I had the space and I had the time, even if I didn't have quite the energy for it. So I'd started my interest in spirituality, healing, and intuitive abilities at that point, really. Prior to that, someone had handed me the book Celestine Prophecies many years before that, and I think that was probably my only introduction into this idea of synchronicities and maybe there's something bigger. Um, I talked about it briefly on the previous video in that as a child, I asked lots of questions about the meaning of life, and I didn't feel like I got satisfactory answers. So prior to being ill, I was borderline atheist. Um, I knew that I had a feeling there was something greater and better, but I hadn't really spent any time exploring it. I felt like if nobody could give me a satisfactory answer, it probably meant that there weren't any answers. And it was only during this period of investigation when I was ill that my understanding really blossomed, and I realized I'd just been looking for answers in the wrong place. And when I realized that there were answers, it really opened everything up for me. So, um, so gratitude to the illness as a starting point for all that has come since. So, I talk in a previous video about my chronic fatigue syndrome and how realizing finally, obviously, I knew I wasn't meant to stay in fashion. It was not suited to me on any level whatsoever, but I didn't know what else to do. And when I realized that coaching was my next step, and this was a step onto my true path, my true purpose and contribution, most of my energy came back in. So I was on a coaching course, and I was still kind of hiding a bit of my spiritual growth. I had grown a lot in the time when I had been ill. I had started to tap into a realization that I had answers and maybe messages that came through, but I was still very nervous about sharing them. And I don't believe in sharing if you have not been asked. So I was still very, very quiet about what was possible for me. But I was on this coaching course, and I sort of say I was outed out of the spiritual closet by my coaching trainer. So one week, on one of the weekend courses, I was sort of singled out, and I was asked the question, "You do know you're a channel?" And I didn't on a mental level, but something inside of me nodded. And afterwards, I was like, why did I nod? I don't know what it means. But something inside of me knew the answer was yes, and it nodded. I still to this day don't say I nodded. Something inside of me nodded. So, and then everyone was very accepting that I was a channel immediately. I was asked to give messages to everybody in the group, including the coaching trainers, of which I duly did, and everyone were very happy very excited, very grateful. And it was a really lovely confirmation of trust in my abilities. So that was one of my first steps where I really kind of pushed myself to see if I could access it on demand effectively over the weekend to pull messages for people. So I was a coach for a little while, and then I got a bit frustrated with talking therapy, because that's where I started to notice one of my abilities was quite profoundly clear. And that was, I would be talking to somebody and I could hear their something internal more than what they were saying. Like what they were saying was something that was different to what I was hearing. And I'd be very confused by this and think, I'm sure that's not what they mean. And so I would delve a bit deeper into that. And then there would be times where I could see as clear as day that what they were hiding, and that was the key to the whatever it is they'd come for coaching for. But in my coaching school, we're not allowed to lead anybody. We have to have the respect that everyone will find their own answers. And so I respected it, but I found it very frustrating because I could see very clearly the source of their pain. I could see the core source of what they were saying they wanted to change. And I was trying not to lead them, but I knew exactly where to lead them. So that was the problem that I then encountered with coaching. Is my coaching school was saying you're not allowed to lead because they themselves will know the answer. And I'm like, yeah, but I know where they go. I know where it is, and they refuse to go there. I can see I can see the doorway. I can see the pathway, and they don't want to go. And, I do respect that, everyone in their own time. But at the same time, people had paid me and I felt a duty of service that if I know the answer to what could really help them, it would be wrong to not provide it. But anyway, so I went from coaching to, one day I had this intuitive, and I was still going to stay in coaching. I just found it a bit frustrating. But then one day I signed up for something on a Sunday afternoon in London. I got there and I thought to myself, what have I signed up for? My intuition had taken me to an event on a Sunday. And I didn't know what I'd signed up for. And then I got there and it was a whole day of healing techniques being demonstrated. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this is why I'm here then. The universe wants me to learn a healing technique. And of all the ones that were on offer, it was quantum touch that stood out the most. I had a distance healing session to see if it worked, if it was true or not. It had a profound effect on me, and because of that, I then decided I was going to learn it as a practitioner. And this is where these abilities really started to kick in. So, with permission for healing, people often will give you permission. You say, "Yeah, am I okay to just go in and check, what needs healing?" And people will say yes, and I'm like, brilliant. And I could feel it. I could see inside the body to a certain extent. What I discovered is that I could pinpoint a feeling and an age, often an age. And then I'd say, okay, at this age, this is what I'm hearing. And I could almost hear like, let go of me, or, oh, I don't want to be here, or something like that. And I could hear it very clearly. And I said, what happened at this age? And people would say, oh, at this age, this is what happened. I'm like, right, that's the starting point of this condition. And so I could really that's where I realized I could tap into the body and the mind, and also to a certain extent the energetic field of information in your aura, to find the information to help the person I was working with. And this really developed over time through each client that I had. and each, we had to do a certain number of hours to become a certified quantum touch practitioner. So a lot of it came through people volunteering. And I realized that it was really beneficial to people to be able to go in and see what they can't see themselves. And, you know, I admit I have blind spots too. I must do. I'm quite good at finding my own, but by golly, if I could pay someone to tell me where my blind spots are, I would do that too. um, so the it really it really transformed from right at the beginning when I felt like I got messages through to being able to tune in to the body, to the mind, to the energy. And it came about because I'm a questioner. I always ask questions. So I would just say, what's really going on here? And then I would hear an answer. Come on, what's really going on with this illness? What's really going on here? Where did this start? As simple as that. And realizing I could hear an answer or see something was really important. And at that point, because of quantum touch is an energy modality, um, I could actually physically feel if there was pain somewhere, and it would hurt me. I could feel it. It was energetically painful sometimes when you are putting your hands. You're not necessarily on the person, but in the energy of wherever the pain is. I would feel it, and I would feel as I did the energy work that the pain would dissipate, and then I would know it was healed. So. These were all things that sort of popped up. I didn't ask for them, but in a way I was asking because I was working with people and I was thinking, how can I help this person? And through asking, how can I help? These things would appear. These abilities would appear. And often I didn't have a belief in certain things before they appear. They would just appear and I'm like, oh, I'll just do that now. So working with clients, and sometimes it was working with difficult clients. So another example is where I had a client who couldn't muscle test, and I can't muscle test. And you can say drink water or do the crosswalk and anything else, and I still can't muscle test. It's one of those things. I can't use pendulums either. For some reason, I just can't use them. And this client of mine could not be muscle tested. And I had just learned a technique called psych-K, where you change beliefs and you muscle test. And a lot of intuitive healing techniques involve muscle testing. And because I just thought I can't muscle test her. I can't proxy muscle test for her either. I'll just try and ask energetically yes and no, because I don't know what else I can do. And so I said, can I do that? And they're like, yeah, okay, you can do that. And it's like, so energetically, I'd ask yes and no. And I would see it move yes and no. Energetically, I would see I would feel a movement from one side to the other, or it'd stay in the middle. And that's when I realized I could energetically ask for such questions to be asked. I didn't need to do it on the physical level. And it was because of this one particular client. So, I developed things usually by sort of hitting an issue with a client and then thinking, well, I don't know what to do with this. How can I help them? What could I do? Could I do this? And usually whatever idea popped into the head was usually, spirit helping and gave me an answer, and we just went with it. I didn't know I could do certain things like deal with past lives and ancestors. It only came about because I would say, what is the source of this? It was the source of this condition. And the answer would be, oh, there's an ancestor here. And I'd be like, oh, I didn't even know ancestors could do anything. So it was literally, they would unfold with each client. And then he was like, well, what do I do with this ancestor? Oh, you can talk to them and resolve it. And I was like, oh, okay. And I just followed the lead of whatever spirit showed me. I didn't know how to do it. I had a client once who came and she had said she couldn't work with anybody, with a healer, because she'd had some great deal of trauma. And I said, well, I've never traumatized anyone. I've never re-traumatized anyone who I've ever worked with, but come in your own time. Don't feel like, come when you're ready. And she came once, and I looked and I said, well, what's here? What's? And I knew what the trauma was, so I knew what she thought it was. But I just said, well, what do I need to do here? And I could see a tear in her aura. Prior to that, I didn't even know a tear in an aura existed. I've never seen one since. I don't even know how that's possible. And I was like, universe, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? And the universe says, sewing needle, sew up the tear. I'm like, all right, I'll sew up the tear then. So got a energetic needle and thread. I sewed up the tear, and on that last bit, the client started giggling like crazy, and I was like, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "Yeah, I've never felt whole for like 10 years, and now suddenly I feel like myself again." Um, didn't know it was possible. Still would not put it as a service. I wouldn't offer it as a service because she's the only person I've ever met who had a tear in her aura, and I didn't know what to do. I just follow what the universe says. I ask a question, how can I help? And I get an answer, and I just do that. I just follow that with extreme trust. So I think, and this leads quite nicely to the something I wanted to share, and that is, I think probably because I have had this truth mechanism within inside of me that I can tell a lie and I can tell an untruth and I can tell if something's being hidden from me, is that when I hear truth or if I hear something from spirit, I don't tend to question it. I have quite a strong sense of faith and trust. So, and I think it's because if it didn't feel right, I wouldn't be doing it. If it didn't feel like the truth, I wouldn't follow it. But I don't get red flags. So if I don't get a red flag from something, if a bell doesn't go off saying that's not true, I can have complete trust and faith in it. So one of the things with healing and healing abilities and intuition is, and I taught quantum touch for quite a few years, is that people would wonder how I could be so I could just trust it. And I think the trust is that I believed, and this is a belief, I believe that through the experiences that I've had with spirit, they have never ever given me poor advice. They've never taken me down a wrong path. They've never said it's this illness and it's not that illness. They've never done anything to make me distrust them. And so if I ask, I believe that it's disrespectful to think that my tiny little mind in this lifetime knows better than the wisdom of the universe. So I tend to just follow. It's not a blind faith. I am a questioner. So sometimes if I don't like it because I don't want to do something, I will question it, but I will still follow it. And that is just purely because, sometimes when it's advice the universe has given me and I don't want to do it, I'll argue with them for a little bit. But I will follow it because I'm a big believer if you ask, you must follow. If you don't want to know, if you don't think you're going to not like the answer, then don't ask. But if you're asking, you should always follow. So that's a part of having that faith and trust in my abilities, was purely because I would offer it unattached to is it right or is it wrong. Without this right and wrong, I would just say, this is what I'm seeing. Does that feel right? And I very, very rarely had someone come back and say, no, that's not it. In all cases, people would say to me, I wouldn't have said it, but yeah, that's right. And this is what happens, is that we filter quite a lot of what is true. We filter it. And so when I realized I could listen into what people's minds especially were saying, what that meant is I could cut out the middleman. So I do lots of processes that that use voice commands. And if I say to somebody, say this, how do you feel about it? And they say, yeah, I think I feel good about that sentence. And I'm like, that's funny because I've just asked the same question of your subconscious mind, and it says it does not agree at all. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I can kind of see that. And so there's a filter that goes on. So when you actually go directly to mind, or I can do it telepathically, so I do it internally. And then I ask a question, I get an answer, I return back with the client, and I say, well, actually, this is what I'm hearing in here. And And so I energetically check when the subconscious mind has changed its feeling about something. And so that again has only come about because of that, the person who I couldn't muscle test and I could see yes and no. And then because she had quite a lot of trauma, it was quite difficult because she would always filter everything. And so I said, do you mind if I just go in and speak directly? Because at the time she'd come for changing beliefs, and that's why we were doing psych-K, which is a technique. And then I realized I could just drop most of psych-K and just go in and ask, and then we could have a conversation verbally and internally with her permission. And we could just change that a lot quicker than if I just did it on the external, just did it verbally. And so the realization that I could talk to a subconscious mind, reason with it. And you can reason with it on the external as well. Usually, if you're talking to somebody and they've picked up an untruth and you talk on a verbal level with them and you sort of let them see that it's not true actually about themselves or about society or about how something works, it starts to shift. It starts to shift a belief. And so beliefs are more malleable than you would realize. People think, I've got a belief, it's really hard. No, you can move those quite quickly. On the energetic level and through conversation and through doing it internally. It moves relatively fast when you know how. So I'm going to stop this video here because I'm very conscious that my videos are quite long. And then I will create a second video, which is talking about how I developed speaking to my guides and speaking to the realm of the gurus and who I call the 3 Ps. And that's a slightly different developmental process. So I'll speak about that in the next video.